Beautiful.
Good morning.
Okay. So we just finished mentioning that offerings that have a blemish, according to Rabbi Akiva, if the blemish came first, so then they're invalid. If they were sanctified and the blemish came after, and you incorrectly, inappropriately put it up on the altar, you don't remove it. Now, a female Ola offering is not permitted. It has to be a male Ola offering. Therefore, a female Ola offering is the same as an offering that had a blemish and then became sanctified, right? Because it intrinsically is not fit to be offered, just like a blemished offering is intrinsically not fit to be offered. Okay. Now, Masir Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera said, we just mentioned earlier, Hamala Mehen B'chutz Pater, this whole long list of things. Let's choose one of them, a fetus. A fetus that's taken outside of the courtyard, you are exempt. So now the implication is a fetus taken out, you're exempt, but Hame'iman Chayev, but if you take out parts of its mother, then you would be liable. So now, what is that talking about? V'heichim mishkachasla, v'olas nekeva. The v'heichim mishkachasla. What's a case of something that the meat has to be sacrificed, and therefore when you take the meat out, you're going to be liable? What's such a case? Well, a chatas offering, the kohanim eat, the peace offering, people eat. So what's something which gets fully consumed, and therefore it's meat? If you take it outside, it's going to be a problem. It must be talking about a ola offering. And now the implication was only a fetus taken outside was exempt, but its mother's meat taken outside, you'd be liable. So what case is that? An ola nekeva, a case of a female ola. So now, Yamris Bishlam Kasav Rabbi Akiva, ola nekeva, im also lotered, Hamani Rabbi Akiva. If Rabbi Akiva would hold that offering a female ola, if you offer up a female ola on the altar, you don't have to remove it. Post facto, it's fine. Then we're good to go. But if you tell me, which we do say, Ela Iamris im also teirade, a female ola is the same as a blemished offering, and you have to remove it. So then, one second, a female ola that's offered on the altar is not good. The implication of the brisa is that only a fetus removed is going to be exempt, but its mother's meat, if removed, you're going to be liable. What's that case? A female ola. Now, something which is taken out of its prescribed area is only going to be a problem if it has to be put on the altar. Something which is supposed to be put on the altar, which is then removed outside the prescribed area, is going to be a problem. So now you have a fetus taken out of the prescribed area, let's say the courtyard, exempt. Why? Because fetuses don't get put up on the altar. But the fetus's mother, its meat, if it's taken out, would be a problem. What's that case? What's the case of meat that's fully consumed on the altar? And if you remove it, it's going to be a problem. Only a female ola. Ola because, not Spanish, but ola because it's fully consumed. And female because the females give birth to the fetuses. They have the children. So we have an ola nekeva, a female ola. And the implication of the brisa is if you remove its meat outside the area, it's going to be a problem. You're going to be liable. But why? According to Rabbi Akiva, such meat that's put up on the altar is the same as a blemished offering that then became sanctified. It's a nothing. You don't put up a female ola on the altar. So if you don't put it up on the altar, then there should be no problem to remove it outside of the courtyard. And yet the implication is not that way. So, yeah, how many? Says the Gemara, maybe change the implication, so to speak. The fetus taken out is exempt. Which part are you liable though? Ema hamale mehen b'chutz pater, but ha me'emure iman chayev. Maybe the sacrificial parts of its mother, that's what you're going to be liable for. Not the meat of the mother, but the sacrificial parts of the mother, that you're going to be liable for. Yeah. Now, once you're talking about the sacrificial parts of the animal and not the meat, so then we're no longer limited to have to establish the implication of the brisa as referring to an ola. Meaning, we only brought up an ola over here because we needed something which its meat gets fully consumed. But what was that? An ola. But once now the implication is the fetus gets removed, but the sacrificial parts of the animal get offered up, so that could be a korban chatas, that could be a korban shlamim. Those things, the meat is not fully consumed, but the sacrificial parts of the animal are fully consumed. So those things that are brought on the altar, if you bring them outside the prescribed area, then you're going to be liable. But then it has nothing to do with an ola, and it's no problem with Rabbi Akiva. Says the Gemara, the ha mehen katani. It says if you remove them, the iman dumya did who? If you remove them, what's them? The meat of the fetus. The fetus, if you remove them outside, you're exempt. So the implication should be something which is similar to it. It's just like you're talking about the fetus meat that's being removed. The implication is if you take out the meat of its mother, you'll be liable. Not if you take out the sacrificial parts. The fetus is not a sacrificial part. So that implication would be a little bit funny. If you take the fetus out, you're exempt, but the sacrificial parts you're liable. Those aren't similar to each other. The fetus and the meat are very similar to each other. The fetus is the meat. Then if you take it out, you're exempt. The mother's meat, you'll be liable. And if that would be true, that would be a problem with Rabbi Akiva. Says Gemara, okay, you're right. Ela ema hama'ala me'emurehen b'chutz pater. But ha me'emuri iman chai. You're right. You have to say that when the Bryce is talking, it's referring to the sacrificial parts of I guess of the fetus. What's the sacrificial part of a fetus? I guess the other parts of the fetus, not the meat of the fetus. I guess the liver or the stomach, yeah. Those parts that are generally offered up, so those parts of the fetus, if you remove them outside the prescribed area, you're going to be exempt because it's a fetus and those things don't get offered up. But if you would do the same thing to its mother and remove those sacrificial parts, then you will be liable because those things are offered up on the altar. Okay. Shachtu, next mission. Shachtu amanas la'aniach es damo. So continuing about invalid thoughts. Shachtu, you slaughtered an animal. Almanas. Almanas lahaniach es damo. Now, you want to leave over the blood, not to consume the blood. Just you want to leave it over. That was your intent. Slaughter an animal to leave the blood over. So now, pigel is consuming it after the right time, after the right place. This is just, I want to leave it over. Or just leave over the sacrificial parts of the animal for tomorrow. I want to remove them outside. So Rabbi Yehuda postal. Rabbi Yehuda said it's invalid. See why? Either reverse or logic, we'll see. The Chacham say the animal is still kosher, meaning such a thought doesn't invalidate. So Rabbi Yehuda is the novelty. You're not planning to eat the parts. You're not planning to sacrifice the parts. You're just leaving it out, leaving it over. And yet he holds that that's invalid. So see why. Now, let's see if a bunch of other invalid thoughts you have in mind when you're doing one of the services, Amanas Litan Al Gabe Kevesh. You want to put the blood onto the ramp, or Shelo Keneged Yisod, or not corresponding to the part of the altar that protrudes, that the base protrudes. So, or you want to have in mind the blood above below, meaning the blood that goes usually above the red line, below the red line, below the red line, above the red line. That's Hanitanim B'Pnim, next page, B'Chutz, or the ones that are usually sacrificed on the inner altar, you want to do it on the outer altar, or the other way around, stuff that's on the outer altar, you want to put on the inner altar, or you have in mind, Sheyochluhu Tmehim. When you're doing the Shrita, let's say you have in mind that a Tameh person should eat the sacrifice, or Shiakrivuhu Tmehim, or a Tameh person should bring the sacrifice, or Sheyochluhu Arelim, or you have in mind that someone who's uncircumcised should eat the offering. Sorry for Pesach offering. don't think every offering has a restriction every circumstance. Or that an uncircumcised person should bring the offering, or you have in mind the Shaber Atzamos Pesach. There's a special restriction by the Pesach offering, you can't break the bones. So if you have in mind that you're going to break the bones, or you also can't bring it, you have to boil up the offering, you can't bring it raw. Lechol Heimenu Na. If you have in mind you're going to eat it raw, which is also prohibition, or you have in mind you're going to mix the kosher blood with the invalid blood, all those things are kosher. The animal remains valid. The things that invalidate are the pigal intentions outside the right time, outside the right place. As long as it's consumed, if you want to consume it outside the right time or outside the right place, or like the very first mission of Zbachim, if you have in mind a different offering when you're slaughtering the Chatas offering or the Pesach offering, that's also going to invalidate. But all these other intentions are not going to invalidate the offering. Even though, a comely person should not eat the Pesach, should not eat the offering, having that in mind is not going to invalidate. So really only a few intentions actually invalidate. It's not so hard. Just eat that. Yeah. Once again, either we're talking about the crazies, or we talk about the outlier cases to get the rule, right? So you have to bring sometimes the more wild cases, but yeah. Okay, so now Rabbi Yehuda's a novel opinion. Rabbi Yehuda says if you have in mind to leave over blood or leave over the sacrificial parts of the offering, the offering is going to be invalid. So why? My taima did Rabbi Yehuda. My taima did Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Elazar trey kroi sivi. I'll tell you what. According to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yehuda has two psukim, and the reconciliation of the two will get you his halacha. It says benosar when leaving stuff over. What does it say? Benosar kasav echad omer. One pasuk says lo sosiru mimenu ad boker. You cannot leave over the food until the morning. That's one verse. Kasav echad omer lo yaniach mimenu ad boker. You can't leave it over until the morning. One verse is in the 12th chapter of Shmos. That's talking about by that Korban Pesach, and other verses talking about in Devarim. Yeah, and you can't leave it over. So why does the Torah repeat itself? We already know that you can't leave things over. So why does it repeat itself? So says Rabbi Yehuda, Im einu inyan lehaniach, tineu inyan le'inyan machsheves hinuach. If the verse in Devarim is not coming to teach you that you can't leave it over till the morning, because you know that already from earlier in the Torah, it must be teaching you that you can't have in mind to leave it over. So having in mind to leave it over is also going to invalidate. Says the Gemara of Rabbi Yehuda, you need that verse to teach you that. You already use it for something else. Okay, let's see. So it says in the verse, a lot of the verses are going to be extra, meaning the word is going to be unnecessary. So it says by the Toda offering, it says Ubasar Zevach Todas Shlama, the meat of the Toda offering, of the Shlamim offering. It says, Rashi says, let's see. Lamadnu letoda shenacheles liyom v'layla. The Toda has to be eaten in one day and one night. So it says there, Ubasar Zevach Toda Shlama, Biyom Korbano Yeyachel. When you offer it that day, you have to eat it. Don't leave it over until the morning. So the Toda offering, you have one day and one night to eat it. Okay, fine. Now, Chalipin, Vivlados, and Tmuros Minayin. Chalipin means an exchange, meaning if you lose the offering and you replace it, or Vlados, or it gives birth, or Tmura, you exchange its sanctity onto another offering. How do you know that those three cases you also cannot leave it until the morning? Maybe you think it only applies to it, but when you exchange it, or when it gives birth, or when you transfer its sanctity, those things don't have that same restriction. Talmud Lomar, Zevach. It says Zevach, sacrifice. I think that The word is extra. So it teaches you to teach you even the derivatives are also going to have that restriction. Uminayin l'rabos shalmei nazir v'shalmei pesach. How do you know that we're including the peace offering of a nazir and the shalmei pesach? Talmud lomar shlamav. It says shlamav. Extra word shlamav teaches you includes those also. What about lachmei toda v'chalos v'rikikin? The Toda offering is offered up with 40 bread offerings, of 4 different kinds of flour, but chalos v'rakikin, 2 different kinds of breads. Sorry. Lachmei Toda v'chalos v'rakikin shebenazir minayin. So that is. So lachmei Toda. And then also the different things brought with a nazir. Different, I guess, that a nazir has to bring. Okay.
He brings a bread and he brings nuts.
Okay, yeah. Labor just means a thin form of bread.
2 varieties of unleavened bread.
It's just the difference between cooking things on a very small pan that's very thin. Right, it'll come out one way, and when you cook things on a thicker pan, it'll come out thicker. That's it. It doesn't mean like a wafer you find in Safeway, the chocolate wafers, you know. So I think it just means a thinner form of, like matzah is very thin, challah is thick, something like that. Okay, how do you know? Talmud Omar, korban, no. Fine. So all these extra words teach you that all of these things you cannot leave them over past their prescribed time. Good. Kulon kore ani bahan lo yaniah. They're all learned out of that verse, which says you cannot leave it over. So, in Cain, now, so it's interesting. The Torah uses 2 different expressions about leaving something over. Lo so siru, no sar, you can't leave over. And lo yaniah, you also can't leave it over. So, I guess one would literally be like, you can't extra it. Meaning, it can't be left, you can't left over it. Lo so siru, you can't make it no sar. How do you make it no sar? By leaving it over. Lo yaniach is just to leave it. Yaniach is just to leave it. So either way, it's 2 different words to teach you the same thing. It says in Cain lema kra lo so siru. If you used one word earlier in the Chumash, so looks like it worked over there. So use the same word over here. Mai lo yaniach. The reason it changed the word to teach you in eno inyan lehinuach, teneu inyan lemachshavas hinuach. So Rabbi Yehuda told us originally that he invalidates the offerings if you have in mind to leave it over because he has a verse. That we challenged him and said, you need that verse or something else, all these extra things, to which he responds, that's true, but the Torah still changed its wording when it came to Devarim, and it said, Lo yaniach, instead of Lo so siru. Why? To teach you this extra novelty that not only leaving over, but even thinking to leave over will also invalidate. Fine. So that right now is the proof of Rabbi Yehuda. That's his source. Now, the problem was, there were other cases he invalidated. It wasn't just leaving over. Sorry. Okay. That's very good. That's very good that you explained to me what is his source for the invalidation of thinking to leave something over. But he also said, if you think about removing something outside of the prescribed area, that's also invalid. If I think to remove the offering, if I think to remove the sacrificial parts, just to remove them, not to sacrifice them outside, not to eat them outside, just to bring them outside and leave them. If I have that thought of removing it outside and leaving it, the pickle is always consuming it. It's not consuming it. I have in mind, I'm going to take the sacrificial parts and bring them to Portland on the plane. And just leave it there. I want to leave it in my suitcase for as long as I can. Right? So what's your source for that? These verses don't tell us that. So hatenach lahaniach, but lahotzi ma'ikal meimar. What about removal? That thought to remove is not going to answer that invalidation, what's your source for that? That's one attack on this. The ode, another attack is time of Rabbi Yehuda Svarahu. Rabbi Yehuda's proof is not, its source is not a verse, it's pure logic. What's the logic? Tanya Amr Lam Rabbi Yehuda. Time of Rabbi Yehuda Svarahu. Rabbi Yehuda's simple logic. Whatever you do that's going to invalidate the offering, I hold a thought about that will also invalidate it. Those two go together. So the verse is not the source. It's basic logic. The same way if you remove something, it's going to cause an invalidation. So thinking about it to removing it is also going to cause an invalidation. Now it's like a little bit of a funny thing because who says that when the Torah prohibited you from removing something, it also prohibited you from thinking about removing that thing? Meaning, you really need a source for that. But somehow in Rabbi Yehuda's world, it's so simple that whatever in his world, whatever the Torah invalidates, so then even having invalid thought about that also invalidates. I would have thought I would need a verse, but we're saying it's logic. Just what could be the logic behind it? Yeah, something like this. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so now in the setup of the Mishnah mentioned these two cases, leaving something over and taking something outside, and instead of Rabbi Yehuda posel, he invalidates them. But then it brought a whole bunch of other cases that are kosher, and Rabbi Yehuda didn't say anything. So says the Gemara, if you're going to tell me now that he invalidates, even thinking about the things that actually invalidate, so you should argue in the following cases, in the rest of the cases of our Mishnah. V'niflog nami Rabbi Yehuda b'kulu. He should argue in all the cases. Okay, let's go one by one. Which case do you want to argue? Behei niflog. In which one do you want to argue? Yeah, so word pellet is the last parsha, no? Niflog ha'aretz, separated the world, separate all the languages. Oh. The word peleg is to argue, to separate. Just, yeah. I met a person one time named Peleg. What was his mother thinking? It's like naming kid Nimrod. Like, what? Yes, yeah. So okay, so okay, behind Niflog, in what case should he argue? Bishover atzamos. You want to tell me that if you have in mind you're going to break the Pesach bones, that's going to invalidate? Is that where you want to argue? And lechem and eating it raw, you want to invalidate it? It says more zivcha gufe mi mifsal. If after you did it, you ended up breaking the bones, so then is it going to retroactively invalidate the offering? No. So then Rabbi Yehuda's not going to argue in that case. He's not going to argue about a case where if you do it, then retroactively, you're not going to argue. You're not going to invalidate it. And also eating it without cooking it is not going to retroactively invalidate the offering either. So you're eating the meat after it's been offered. Eating it afterwards, even if you messed up in your cooking process, is not going to retroactively then invalidate your Korban Pesach. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda is not going to argue in that case. But if you have in mind to do this thing, it's going to be invalid. Because even if you do it, it's not going to retroactively invalidate the offering. Al-Manas Shiochluhu Tmeim. Okay, let's say the Mishnah said that if you have in mind that an impure person should eat it, the Shakravuhu Tmeim, or they should offer it up. Once again, Zivcha Gufe Mika Mifsal, is the offering itself going to be invalid? Now, we're not talking about the actual, we're talking about the sacrificial parts of the offering, meaning after the blood was thrown properly. If afterwards an impure person takes the other parts of the animal and puts it on the altar and he's impure, that's not going to retroactively take away everything that you did. So Rashi points out that we're only talking about when you threw the blood and you offer the main part onto the altar. The other parts afterwards, if they're put up by an impure person, it's not going to retroactively take away from all the work you did. So therefore, if you're not going to argue in that case, if you have the wrong intention, it's going to invalidate. Because even if you do it, it's not going to invalidate. Okay. Shiochluhu arelim, v'shiakrivuhu arelim, zivcha gufe mi mifsal. It's not Pesach, yeah, it must be. If you eat it uncircumcised or you bring it up uncircumcised, so that's not going to invalidate the offering. So therefore, Yehuda is not going to have in mind to invalidate the offering. If you have the wrong intentions, if you have the intention that you should that you're going to eat it uncircumcised, it's not going to invalidate the offering. I guess. You'll have your neighbor eat it. I don't know. Yeah, you have your son eat it. Circumcision, dispersion. No. Yeah. So okay. Lishna Achrina, another version says Kol Kamine. What is that? Yeah, Ramina before he was circumcised. Remember that he had no command to circumcise. That was a big question. He kept all the Torah, it says.
Yeah.
But one mitzvah he waited for to be commanded, and that was bris milah. Why did you wait? What did he say? Wouldn't you? Yeah. Yeah. So big question. At the end. Anyways, so either way, Lishna Achrina, another version is Kol Kamine, who's gonna allow the person to bring up the offering when he's puzzled? I mean, who's gonna let him do that? The Kohanim are not gonna listen to him. We're asking who's gonna let the Kohen go and do this? I mean, a guy's not circumcised. He wants to bring the offering, so who's gonna let him do that? No one's gonna do that. So you can't have in mind to invalidate if it depended on somebody else. So they have to allow you to bring this up, but if you're not circumcised, they're not gonna allow you to do it. Lishna Achrina, Kol Kamine.
But if they are illegal, if they illegally do these things, the offering is invalid. Thus, merely having a tent
What's the Lishna Achrina? Right, meaning the guy who's shechting it with having in mind that a tamei person should bring it, or an uncircumcised person should bring it, or eat the meat. So the guy who slaughters it, he himself lacks intent for this to be carried out, right? Because let's say the guy slaughtered it, told somebody who's uncircumcised to go bring up the offering, so they might not listen to him. Right? You asked. Let's face your question. How do you have an uncircumcised person bring it? That's exactly the point. It's dependent on somebody else. Meaning, you're gonna have in mind that someone else who's uncircumcised is gonna bring the offering. But who says that means that your action right now or your thoughts are dependent on somebody else? That Rabbi Yehuda is not gonna say is gonna be a forbidden thought. It's too far removed. Fine. Okay. La'arev daman b'dam psulin. So another example of invalidation was if you mix the kosher blood with the non-kosher blood, so it's going to be kosher. If you have in mind that you're going to mix the blood together, that's going to be valid. So what do you want? You want Rabbi Yehuda to argue in that case? He doesn't argue in that case. Why? Because Rabbi Yehuda Latame, he goes according to his reasoning, which is Ein dam v'atal dam. Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion when you have two things of the same species, you don't say that the majority will nullify it. meaning those things don't nullify each other when you have things of the same species. So ein dam mevatel dam. So he's not going to validate that. So litin as hanitan lamala lamata lamata lamala, having in mind to put the blood on top of the red line, really below, or below above. Why doesn't he invalidate that? Meaning, why doesn't a thought to do that invalidate? If you actually do it, it might be invalid. So why not thinking about it should also be invalid? Rabbi Yehuda Latame, according to his reasoning, he says, Shalolim Komo, Nami Mikoma Krinabe. We had this earlier, that even when you apply things in the wrong place, but it's still considered its place. Meaning, ideally, you shouldn't do it, but since it's all on the altar, so then that's still going to be considered its place. Says the Gemara, V'liflog b'nitanim b'pnim shanatan b'chutz v'nitanim b'chutz shanatan b'pnim. Same thing, putting it on the inside on the outside altar on the inside altar. Why doesn't he invalidate that thought? Because Sav Rabbi Yehuda b'inan makom sheyeh misholosh v'dam b'basar b'emurim. In order to invalidate, you need a place that you're able to do all three things: apply the blood, eat the meat, and sacrifice the sacrificial parts of the offering. That only applied during the time of the bamos, where you're allowed to make a sacrifice on the bamos outside the courtyard. But inside in the inner altar, you only sprinkle blood. You don't eat the meat and you don't bring up the sacrificial parts. So that area is not a place that's fitting for these three. Therefore, bringing the blood inside when it's supposed to be outside is not going to invalidate. Umi is Rabbi Yehuda. I swear, does Rabbi Yehuda really hold of this svara of Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer davar ra? It says in Devarim, you can't bring up an animal that has a blemish, or kol davar ra, any bad thing. What is any bad thing referring to? Ribakan chatas sheshachta b'darim. It's a chatas that instead of being slaughtered in the north, you slaughtered it in the south. Vechatas shenichnas dama lifnim psula, and it's a chatas that you brought the blood inside. So meaning, forget the logic. It's not that. The reason why bringing the blood inside when it's supposed to be sprinkled outside is invalid is not because you need a place that has all three, has the potential for all three, blood, meat, and sacrificial parts, because the Torah says, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that that's going to be invalid. Says the Gemara one time. So what are you saying? That Rabbi Yehuda doesn't agree with this idea that for invalidation you have to bring it in a place that has potential to have the meat eaten, the blood sprinkled, and the sacrificial parts offered, which is only outside but not inside. He doesn't agree to that. V'hatanya Am Rabbi Yehuda hichnis b'shogeg kosher. If you go and you bring it in inadvertently to inside, so then inadvertently it's going to be good. It's going to be kosher. But habemezid puzzle. But if you do it advertently, it's going to be invalid. Says the Gemara. The kaim alon b'shekiper, and we learn the case is referring to that. What, you sprinkled the blood inside, right? Yeah. When you take the blood that should be sprinkled on the inside, which atones, and do it on the inside, if you do it advertently, it's going to be a problem. So what do you see? He holds. Why is it a problem? Because it's not an area that's liable, that has potential to do all three things. You can only bring the blood inside. So he does hold of that. So why do you have to have a verse tell me that someone brings the blood from outside inside is going to be invalid? Rabbi Yehuda holds of that logic, that it has to be a place that's potential for all three. So says the Gemara, Hashtu ma'hasam Aili keeper in ilo keeper lo, hacha dechashiv chashuve lo kol shekain. So if you actually bring it in and it's going to be invalid, so then for sure thinking about it should for sure be invalid. The other way around. Just like over there, if you ended up bringing it, it's considered fine. Keeper any low, keeper low. If you ended up atoning, it's going to be a problem. But if not. So then for sure, thinking about it should for sure just thinking about bringing the blood inside should not invalidate. So. Yeah, so it sounds like, does Rabbi Yehuda invalidate only when you actually bring the blood inside, or does he invalidate it when you sprinkle it inside? So it seems to be two opinions. Says the Gemara, you're right. It's Trey Tanai. I'll leave it to Rabbi Yehuda. It's two Tanaim. They argue about what Rabbi Yehuda held. Does he hold that just bringing the blood inside invalidates, or does he hold that no, bringing the blood inside doesn't invalidate? Applying the blood inside, that's going to invalidate. Okay, the Sav Rabbi Yehuda Chadash Shakta B'Darom, a Chadash that's shakted in the south instead of in the north. Yehi Chayiv, a person will be liable malchus for that. The Hatanya, is that true? Rabbi Yehuda Omer Yachol Chadash Shakta B'Darom Yehi Chayiv. You would have thought that a Chadash slaughtered in the south and not in the north is going to be liable. Talmud Lomar Lo Tizbach Lashem Elokecha Shor V'Sev V'Chulei Kol Davara Al Davara Tamechayvo V'Yet Tamechayvo Al Chadash Shakta B'Darom. So same thing over here. What does he hold? If a chatas is shechted, in the in the south, not in the north, is it valid or is it invalid? There seems to be two opinions. Earlier we thought it was invalid. Now we're saying it is valid. So it says in our same answer. Trade tonight. I'll leave it to you. Two Tanaim that have a dispute. What does Rabbi Yehuda hold? Amar Rabbi Abba Umod Rabbi Yehuda Shechod Rekovel Lepigol. Now, Rabbi Yehuda is going to agree that even though these thoughts are invalid, now Rabbi Abba is going to tell us a novelty that usually we know that thoughts that are invalid mixed with pigel thoughts don't cause pigel. Has to be the only showing down. So Rabbi Abba though, Umod Rabbi Yehuda will agree. Shechozer v'kovo lepigel. If you go and have a pigel thought, so let's say you have in mind you're going to leave the blood over, just leave it over. Rabbi Yehuda says that's an invalidation. Rabbi Abba saying that Rabbi Yehuda will agree that if you then after that you have in mind during one of the services to consume the offering outside the right time, so now you have two invalid thoughts, that's still going to invalidate. It's a novelty. Until now we thought you cannot have two thoughts that cause pigel. It has to be the only show in town. So yeah. So Amar Rabbi Abba Mod Rabbi Yehuda Shechod Rekovel Lepigel. Amar Rava, I'll try to prove it to you. Try. Teda. Listen, the pigel if needs Rika lo klumu. Until the blood has been sprinkled, your invalid thought if pigel is a zero. Only once you apply the blood, we say that your pigel thought is going to invalidate the offering. The asya Zrika v'kavala b'pigel. Zrika comes and establishes the offering as a pigel offering. So to second. Yeah, so according to Rabbi Yehuda, just like you see by pigel, you have to wait until the blood has been thrown to establish it as pigel. So too, that if you have this invalid thought now, and it's different because this invalid thought will invalidate it right now. Pigel, you have to wait till the throwing of the blood. So for a while. Okay. I think what he's saying is that pigel, until you throw the blood, it's a zero. Once you throw the blood, it's established as pigel. So this thought that we have to leave the blood over, there's no reason why later you cannot establish something as pigel, because pigel before you throw the blood is a zero. So any thoughts you have before the blood is thrown is like a zero until you throw the blood. That's his logic. Until you throw the blood, the pigel is nothing. So anything else is going to be considered a nothing also, I think. And therefore, once you throw the blood, pigel will still take effect. Says the Gemara, no, that's not good. Belohi. Hasam hu chadam machshavahi, hacha trei machshava. Big difference. Over there, when it's just talking about pigel, it's the only thought. When it's the only thought, then you have to wait until Zrika and it becomes pigel. But here there are two thoughts. There are two thoughts here, two invalid thoughts. And When you have two invalid thoughts, that's not going to allow Pigel to have its invalidation. Ace Rav Huna has an attack on this statement of Rabbi Abba. If you have in mind to place the blood below above or above below, to do it right away, it's going to be kosher. It's not going to invalidate the offering. If afterwards you think to consume the offering outside the right place, that will invalidate. If you have in mind afterwards to invalidate, to eat the offering outside the right time, that's going to be pigel kares. However, lemachar, let's say you have in mind to apply the blood in the wrong place tomorrow, that's going to be invalid. Puzzle. If after that you have in mind to consume the offering outside the right place, outside the right time, bein chutz l'mkomo, chutz zmano, bein chutz l'mkomo, puzzle ve'ein bo kares. So if you have in mind to offer blood in the wrong place, but you're going to do it tomorrow, that's going to cause an invalidation. If afterwards you go and you have in mind to consume the meat outside the right time, which you usually get somebody kares, so that we say puzzle ve'ein bo kares. It's going to be invalid, but you don't get kares, because once again you have two thoughts, and pigel has to be the only show in town. That will be against Rabbi Abba. Tiyufta, Rabbi Abba Tiyufta, and he is knocked out. This brisa is a head-on collision with Rabbi Abba. Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Ravina Bar Sila, Chishev sheochlu tmeim l'machar. You have in mind that impure people should eat the meat tomorrow. Even though the fact that an impure person eats the meat doesn't invalidate it, but it's tomorrow. Eating meat tomorrow, that's going to be pigel, even though it's being done by an impure person. So Amar Rava Teda, I'll prove it to you. The basar lefnei zrika lo chazi. Meat before zrika, before throwing the blood, is not fit to be consumed. And then v'chi be missile. And when you think wrong thought about it, it's going to invalidate it. So too here. So to here, when you have in mind to eat the meat tomorrow, after the throwing of the blood, it should for sure be invalid. So says the Gemara, no, velohi. Hasam zarik umegzi, hachalo megzi klal. A regular case, it's you throw the blood and it's fitting to eat. Here you throw the blood, but the person's impure. So therefore, it's not fitting to eat. Okay, finish the paragraph tomorrow. Rolling along. Yeah, we guys are running along. Okay, coming up soon. We'll have some runnings. Yes, I'm sure.